educators, my fellow colleagues from OKC Beautiful, Sarah and Micah, who are here. Wave, guys. They take care of the 2 school gardens that are part of our garden educator pilot program that's been going on this whole year and will be going on next year. And so they have pretty special jobs. Can you guys see my screen? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm not sure how many of you were here last time. Anthony, do you want to do a quick, just like a one-liner about Lynn Institute?
Yeah. So my name is Anthony Kobe. I'm the Director of Collaboratives and Community Engagement for the Lynn Institute. Lynn Institute's a unique organization in that a lot of our work is centered around serving vulnerable populations. And so we do a lot of work in Northeast Oklahoma City. 2014, we started a research study to look at quality of life in Northeast. And from that, we saw a lot of the health conditions were somewhat troubling, to be, to say the least. And from that, we formed the Healthy Community Collaborative. And this is a culmination of different community leaders, civic leaders, organization leaders that all come together to build initiatives and really work towards increasing some of the circumstances or bettering some of the circumstances in Northeast Oklahoma City. So it's a lot of good things. If you're interested to learn more, I welcome you to reach out to me. I'm going to send you guys an email tomorrow just with some follow-up on the information that we're talking about this evening. And so I'd love to get you plugged in or tell you a little bit more about what we do. But I'm excited to have Kat on with us. She's a wealth of knowledge, and so we are so pleased that she'd take time out of her day and life to work with us on that. So we're incredibly excited and thankful for you, Kat.
Well, likewise. OKC Beautiful has a ongoing partnership with Lynn Institute now to help with the coalition working to help out with improvements in the Northeast Oklahoma City community. And one of those aspects is to revitalize their community garden and bring gardening knowledge, opportunities to the residents who are part of that garden and just in general. So, and kind of to join hands together because gardening is something that kind of brings everyone together from the entire, community. So OKC Harvest is the school garden support program of OKC Beautiful, and that's the program that I run at OKC Beautiful. I threw in a couple of slides here just to give you guys a visual. These are OKC Beautiful projects. We are a beautification and environmental education group. We do a lot of litter cleanup and environmental education around litter and recycling. This is the Mother Earth program that goes into elementary schools every fall. These are shots from our garden program that's going on. We are currently working to find a more sustainable model for supporting school gardens, and that's where the garden educators come in. So we are working to improve the academics and the wellness of students through weekly hands-on garden-based learning. So, okay, so today's topic, last time we talked about kind of the basic tenets of how to grow a healthy garden from an organic or sustainable gardening point of view. And today I'm going to talk about some of the more favorite veggies that people grow during the summertime here in Oklahoma. This talk could be like hours long. We could talk about all this stuff all day because there's so many levels. It's very sprawling. I have way more slides than we could possibly talk through tonight. So I'm just going to run through things. And Anthony, did everyone get the outline?
Yeah, so I dropped the outline. A couple of us had some issues,
okay,
but I'm going to drop it here in just in a second. And so
that outline is basically just because I can't touch on everything that we could talk about, and that's for you to take away. And you can click on the links in that document to find more information. We'll also send out a PDF copy of these slides, which have a lot of the slides have links. So we're going to jump in on tomatoes, peppers, melons, and squash. And then we'll do questions at the end. So if you have a question, just jot it down or send it to Anthony in the chat, and we'll talk about everything you want to know. So I picked, it was hard to narrow it down on which ones to choose for this class, but I chose these because they represent kind of the more common things that everybody wants to grow. Peppers and tomatoes are cousins in the same family. They're in the Solanum or the Solanaceae family. They're known as the nightshades. They also have a close cousin in eggplant. We won't talk about eggplant tonight. And then another family that is a really warm season crop that we grow well here are the cucurbits, or the cucumber family. But we're not going to talk about cucumbers. We're just going to talk about the melons, and then we'll cover squash and winter squash. But that alone is just a lot. Okay, so on tomatoes, and I'm sure people have burning questions if they're growing tomatoes right now. So write them down and we'll talk about them. There's a whole lot of tomato types. I kind of grouped them here for ease of just being able to kind of organize them in your mind. You'll hear these terms thrown around, and I just want to kind of make sure everybody's comfortable with them. So heirlooms are tomatoes that can be bred. The seed that you would save is viable, and it could be crossed by you with another tomato in your garden if you chose to do that. These are varieties that have been bred by farmers and gardeners over years, decades, centuries, for certain qualities that people just love. And they tend to be really, they tend to have special qualities that kind of represent a certain desire, a certain need of the people who bred them. So whether it's flavor or size or ability to ripen during heat, that kind of thing. So your Cherokee Purples and your Mortgage Lifter and what am I trying to say? Oh gosh, well, I have a whole list for you. Black Crim is the one I wanted to say. There's 100 heirlooms. Hybrids are the ones that are bred, they're bred professionally, and when they're crossed, the seed is not going to be true to the parent. And so you have to rely on the professional breeders. It's not genetically modified, but it's bred in such a way where they've crossed two species to create one that when the seed is saved from that fruit, it won't bear out the same as its parent. So you'll get something funky. But those hybrids are special because they are bred specifically, in most cases, to resist disease. And so they tend to be ones that we gravitate towards here in Oklahoma for reasons I'll cover. Then there's categories on size. You'll hear people say slicers, cherries, and sauce, or paste tomatoes. Paste tomatoes aren't ones you really want to eat out of hand. They're more ones that you would make, spaghetti sauce out of. And then you have these categories that have to do with when they ripen. Are they early, meaning do they ripen in 50 or 60 days, or are they medium, like 60 to 70 days, or do they take a long time, 85 to 90 or more days? So I like to talk about Oklahoma reality when it comes to growing tomatoes. People think, I don't know, we associate tomatoes with summertime. So in our summer, that means 100 degrees. Well, in the real, the dream of the tomato, if you could call it that, would be to live in the Mediterranean. That's where it's genetically from. And it doesn't really like the climate here. So you just have to realize that, don't feel bad about yourself when your tomatoes don't go as planned here in central Oklahoma, because they don't really like temperatures that are as high as we get. Getting your tomatoes in early helps, or then growing them in the fall. So temperatures over 104 degrees for only 4 hours can cause the flowers to abort. So you'll see sometimes your flowers will just plain fall off. Or you'll just have a beautiful plant full of flowers that don't actually ever set fruit. So the reproduction of the plant gets really messed up when it's super, super hot. And then when the nighttime temperatures stay above 85, the same thing happens. Also, if you get your tomatoes to form and set fruit early in the season, but then they just sit there on the vine green for months, and you're just wondering what's happening, it's because of the heat. If it starts to turn at all from green to some kind of like resemblance of a color, you should go ahead and take it off the plant and ripen it inside. So the optimal temperatures, don't laugh, for tomatoes, are somewhere around, 75, 80, 85, which is funny, right? We don't live in Maine, and so that's just the reality that we have. But you can still grow them here. It's just you have to be cognizant of the stress that the tomatoes are under. See if you can provide some afternoon shade where you plant your tomatoes. Look for heat-tolerant varieties. Look for disease-tolerant varieties. And when you do get into a hot spell, give your tomatoes an afternoon bath, overhead water, and see if that helps. Tomatoes and peppers, you don't really start from seed in the garden because you want to have them growing fast once you get them in the ground. So you buy starts or grow your own starts, and that's how you kind of get a jump on the season. So this document I am sharing with you all. I don't think it was I didn't send this to you yet, Anthony, did I? I didn't, okay. So I'm gonna post this on our website, and I'm going to include it in the email I'll send you tomorrow with the link to this, with the PDF of the slides. And this has the tomatoes that are really best suited for our region divided up by type. This is just a collection I've kind of put together over the years from different local farmers that have kind of shared that. And then just some internet help. So tomatoes and peppers both are not that particularly picky about soil or pH. Just put a bunch of compost in and you're good to go. And then we'll talk about fertilizing. Fertilizing does help with some all-purpose organic fertilizer. I'm providing also in the outline has some documents on it about timing, so you can kind of hone in on when to plant. The purpose of these couple slides are to help you understand the special thing about planting tomatoes is that they adventitiously root, which is a fancy way of saying if the stem has contact with the soil, it'll actually produce a root. The cells differentiate from being a stem to suddenly wanting to be a root producing set of tissues. So you can take advantage of that when you have a seedling like this to remove some of the lower stems and actually bury the plant all the way up to this point. And you'll get a much more robust root system by doing that. So when you get your tomato starts from the nursery or you grow your own, when they come out of the pot, just plan to dig a much bigger hole than what you thought, what matches the actual root ball. So there's a picture of that particular plant going into a hole that's appropriate for a tomato because it will root all the way down the stem. Okay, so when we talked a little bit about fertilizing, this is kind of something that maybe beginner gardeners aren't really sure what to do with. And also if you're wanting to go organic, how do you know what to grab? And how do you know when to apply? So kind of put that information here for you. And this will apply to peppers as well. So when the fruit, I always put a little bit of all-purpose organic fertilizer, now we'll show you which ones I recommend, in the hole at planting time. And then when the first flowers appear, it's a good time to add some more. And then after fruit is the size of ping pong balls, and then again after you harvest are good rules of thumb. You don't want to add too much nitrogen along the way because nitrogen is what causes things to grow strong leafy growth. And if your plant's busy making beautiful green leaves, it's not going to put energy into the fruit, and that's the whole purpose of your tomatoes. So if you're going to want to add some of these things, which are great for micronutrients and overall health, which are these liquids that I recommend. I'm not going to talk about Garrett juice tonight. You could do a whole class on that, but Google Garrett juice. It's by the Dirt Doctor. He's out of Texas. You can make your own or you can buy his. This is fish emulsion or compost tea are things that you can buy or make. And they are very good for just the overall health of the plant. With fish, it's high in nitrogen if it's very strong. So you just want to dilute it a bit when you put it on. Whoops, I trigger happy here. Epsom salts are good if you have a magnesium deficiency, but you may not know if you have a magnesium deficiency. So that would be something that you would determine by a soil test. So when it comes to fertilizing tomatoes, this is a good product that you can get in the big box stores. TLC has some fertilizers as well, and I'm not sure what they're carrying recently that's along these lines. They were carrying the Dr. Earth brand. I'm not sure if they still do, but this Espoma brand is at Lowe's, and it's very, very good. So blossom end rot is something that comes up a lot with tomatoes, and Sarah and I were talking about this recently on her home garden. She had some of this. So it's typically a watering fluctuation problem, which causes the plant not to take up calcium efficiently. And so when you have a calcium absorption problem, you get this effect. So you can also get the skins cracking. If you've ever noticed, your tomatoes will swell up in size right after a big rain. And if they hadn't been watered evenly up to that point, their tissues aren't prepared for that swell, and they'll just crack. So watering evenly in tomatoes is really important. Oh, I meant for this slide to come right after that comment about the magnesium deficiency. But if you want to sample your soil, take a sample of your soil into the extension office here for Oklahoma County. It's on Northeast 63rd. It's only $10, and they will give you a full report on everything in your soil that you would want to know. You can even ask them to measure your organic matter content, which we talked about last week, for $3 extra. So it's a really good deal. I threw this in here because tomatoes you just can't get enough information, and this is actually geared towards home gardeners. It's a document put out by Extension, and it has, it's really extensive, and it has a whole list of varieties that they also recommend for our area. And then it has some pest information as well. So it's a good document to look at. And when you get those slides, if you click on that image, it's linked. So a lot of people, when they grow tomatoes, will support their tomatoes with a cage. That's what's available, and that's what they've maybe seen done. But we have such high winds here that I've experienced those tomato cages that you get at the hardware store or wherever. They tend to, when the plants get big enough, the plant outgrows them, and then it gets windy and the whole thing just kind of falls over, and it doesn't really help at all. So I learned this technique growing on a larger scale, but it's totally doable in a home garden. And that's where you put some solid posts at the ends of your row, and then you put some smaller stakes at each plant, or you don't even have to put smaller stakes at each plant if you have a good weave going. I recommend nylon string, not jute, because it won't degrade during the season. And then you just intertwine the twine with the posts, and you hold up your plants that way. And you can see the fruit better, and it's a little bit easier to manage, and it seems to stand up pretty well to our wind. With tomatoes, there's another whole category that we didn't talk about. It's more of it's not really it's kind of a descriptor for growth habit, and that is determinate versus indeterminate. And it's actually something that's worthwhile to pay attention to, because it will be mentioned on the tag if you go to the nursery and look at your tags. Determinate ones are plants that set all their fruit at once, and then all that fruit comes off and it's done. you could then be done with the plant. You could pull it out and plant something else. With the indeterminate, it just goes all season long until the frost kills it. So there's different pruning techniques for those two types. Determinate ones tend to be bushy, and you can just tell that they're not going to sprawl all over. And they don't really need that much pruning. Indeterminate ones, however, really benefit from pruning so that you can determine what you want to be your main stems, and you can kind of control how you get to your fruit that way. So with pruning, it's really about taking off the suckers. And it's hard to explain that, on a conference call like this. So I put a link here, and it should be on your outline. If I didn't put on the outline, I'll correct that. But this takes you to a nice video that I found of a guy talking about how to find suckers and how to prune indeterminate versus determinate. So harvesting tomatoes, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. One thing that people don't realize is that you can pick tomatoes actually before they're totally ripe, and it's actually not a bad thing, especially in our climate, because the ripening, as I mentioned before, stops over 85 or 86 degrees. So it's okay to pull your tomatoes off green and ripen them inside. And then that will also help with shelf life too. Okay, so bugs on tomatoes. One of the things we have the most trouble with here are spider mites. These are tiny little mites. They're arachnids, or a tiny little type of spider, and they like hot and dry conditions, and they tend to congregate on the undersides of leaves, and they make little webs, and they kind of just make your plant look kind of dried up, crackly, and they suck the juice out of the leaves and make them look real drained and light yellow colored. So they are very easy to control with soap if you stay on top of it, like a dishwashing liquid and maybe even a little olive oil in water will work well. Hornworms and fruit worms, these are caterpillar, they're larval form of different moths. The hornworm moths are huge, and the hornworms themselves are big. So I don't know if anybody wants to unmute and cry out if they've ever seen a hornworm. I have. They're the size of your finger. They're about that big, and they do have a big horn on their head. So if you have PTSD from accidentally bumping into a hornworm, shout it out. I feel you. They're big. I'll see if I have a picture on here. That's the hornworm moth, and you can see there's a ruler there to show you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches. That's 6 inches tall right there. They only come out at night, so you don't typically see them. They're actually, the moths are actually kind of pretty. So these are the mites. These are enlarged greatly, so you can see them. Those are like very hard to see in that detail with your naked eye. Oops. And then the fruit worms are just like they're just like a caterpillar. But you don't see those as often around here, but you do see, oh, here's the hornworm picture. So you can see that's probably about the size of a finger right there. So how do you control those? So hornworms, you use Bacillus thuringiensis, that botanical, it's not botanical, sorry, it's a biological pesticide, which is basically a bacteria in a solution or in a powder that is benign to human beings and to ladybugs and non-caterpillar type organisms. Caterpillars, when they ingest it, it ruins their gut and they die pretty much instantly. So that will work on hornworms. It's what we use on the cabbage white butterflies that ravage the brassicas in the spring. And that will also work on fruit worms and corn earworms that get into the tomatoes. So here's a picture of what spider mite damage looks like. You can see the mottled effect on your leaves. So if you see this, you can go out there with a squirt bottle with a little soap in it. You see the homemade recipe down here. Or you can go get something commercial that is botanical, which would be an essential oil base. This one, Mitex, has clove oil and garlic. That will actually kill most pests. Just FYI, you can use it on other things too, besides mites. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the diseases, kind of like a horror movie to talk about tomato diseases because they're ugly and yucky. Nobody wants to really worry too much about them. But these physiological disorders are very easy to deal with. And so blossom end rot, we already talked about, consistent watering, cracked fruit, consistent watering. Way you can have consistent watering without doing any work is to put a big layer of mulch under your tomatoes and your peppers. And we talked about that in the Gardening 101 class, that you shouldn't have any bare soil in your Oklahoma garden. Green shoulder is what happens when the temperatures get up really high, and even when the rest of the fruit turns red, the shoulders stay green. And then sun scald is when your skin gets burned on your tomatoes just from the sun, and that can be remedied by better pruning, making sure you don't expose, not over pruning. So there's some pictures of those physiological disorders. So here's, I think I have I took out the slides of all the tomato diseases and I just put this slide in of how to prevent them. And this is a throwback to the last class where we talked about how you prevent problems in an organic garden. You rotate your crops. Don't grow tomatoes and peppers or anything in that family in the same, and that would include potatoes, peppers, and eggplants, in the same area every year. You need to rotate them around your garden. Improve your soil, build organic matter, and add compost for all the reasons we talked about last time. Use those disease-resistant varieties, which I'm gonna show you a list of disease and how to look for those, that information on the plant label, and then even watering. And then if you do have a diseased leaf or something, don't throw it in your compost pile or throw it on the ground in the garden. Throw it in the trash so that it doesn't get into your environment. So here are the symbols you'll see on the tags for disease resistance that are bred into tomatoes. Now, you're not going to know, as a layperson, you're not going to know all of these diseases, but you can just look at the varieties and see, oh, I see this one is resistant to 3 diseases, and this one's resistant to 5 diseases, and this one over here is only resistant to 1. So if you're having trouble growing healthy tomatoes, go for the high disease resistant variety. Okay, so timing is something that you can really get around a lot of problems by doing correct timing. That's one thing we talked about last time as well. So in the spring, you want to get your tomatoes in early to beat the heat, right? But we have such a long warm season here. It's about 6 months long. And we have the luxury that we can plant in late June, which is coming up, and through July, we can plant a whole nother round of tomatoes that will then ripen before and produce fruit before the freeze that comes in, October. So the only trick with those late tomatoes is that sometimes it just gets hot for weeks. So you can be creative and erect some shade if you don't have if you're growing in containers, you can really move your things around. But if you're out in the garden and you have full sun, you can do these metal hoops with a burlap hoops over on, especially if they're little and your fall crop are little in that time of year. You can cover them fairly easily. You can buy shade cloth or you can use burlap, and those things cut down the temperature. So harvesting tips, we talked a little bit about that. One thing I wanted to say out loud is, and some people know this and other people don't realize it, that if you put a tomato in the refrigerator, you're ruining it. The flavor, and it actually damages the flesh, which is why the flavor goes away. I think people put their tomatoes in the fridge because if they're used to buying store-bought tomatoes, they don't have any flavor anyway. So they don't notice. Store-bought tomatoes just tend to be flavorless because they're bred for shipping across 1,000 miles. So if you're growing your own tomatoes in your garden, you're working hard and you're producing fruit, do not take it inside and let anybody put it in the fridge. Get very
Nope.
mad at that. Okay. All right. So let's go on. We'll go through. I know people probably have questions. Just send them in the chat and we'll move through these as we get them at the end. A lot of what I talked about with peppers is going to relate to, with tomatoes will relate to peppers. So I don't have to repeat a lot of it. I just want to kind of highlight some of the unique things about peppers and things you might not know about how to succeed with growing them. So peppers are easily categorized into sweet and hot. I included this list in your outline because I thought it was so interesting. The Scoville scale was developed by this guy who was obsessed with peppers, and he figured out how to measure the capsaicin in the peppers to figure out how our tongues would react to the heat. So the scale starts at 0 and it goes to, at the top, the Caribbean red habanero. That one is like up to 577,000 on the scale. What I want to point out is that in the world of peppers, there's only like 3 types that are like totally mild, and the rest of them are hot, which is because peppers they evolved in order to ward off pests and problems through the capsaicin in the seeds and the flesh. So, anyways, very interesting if you're interested in the hot pepper world. I'm a total wimp. I don't like any heat in my peppers, which takes the fun out of it, because when you grow all these fun peppers, you want to eat them, but you just can't. But anyway, hot peppers, there's different categories within hot peppers. There's groups, which you can kind of see from this list here. Here's an up close look at that, another view of that scale. So peppers like hot weather, just like tomatoes, but they are, ideally they would be happier in the Mediterranean rather than here on the Southern Plains. But they will grow for us. We just have to be aware of a few things. I put soil temps on here because a lot of people want to grow these things from seed. But again, like with tomatoes, you want to buy your seedlings or grow your own seedlings, because the soil temperature won't be right for very long in order to get them to sprout in your garden outside. And you see the temperatures for setting fruit are those Mediterranean temperatures. So, don't be surprised if you have sort of, once it gets really hot, you kind of have fits and starts with your fruiting. It's just going to depend on what our weather's like. One thing that's different about peppers is that they're a little bit more sensitive to the cold. So when it gets to the end of the season, they're going to go down faster. And at the beginning of the season, you kind of have to wait a little bit longer to get them in because they're more sensitive to those cold swings. They also can handle a little bit more drought. They can handle dry swing between waterings more than tomatoes. So like I said, peppers are really sensitive to cold. So when you are growing your fall crop of tomatoes, you have to be sure to cover them if frost is looming and you want to keep harvesting. A lot of times, if you buy peppers at the farmer's market around here, you'll see little cracks in them. If we would go back to that first slide of the peppers, you can see what I'm talking about. These are peppers grown in a garden where I worked, and a lot of times Oklahoma peppers will have this kind of thing. And they'll also be like a lot smaller than what you get in the grocery store. And that again is from the heat. The size is from the pollination process being challenged. When you live in a cooler climate, you get better pollination and better size on your fruit. Okay, so things you need to know. Peppers do not adventitiously root. That's the fancy term I use for where they root along the stem. So don't bury your peppers the way you would bury your tomatoes. Direct seeding, like with tomatoes, is not recommended. So you're going to bury it up to just about 1/4 inch above that spot right there. recommended varieties of peppers. So I have that special document on tomatoes for you. For everything else, I have listed what the OSU, Oklahoma County Extension recommends for our area. So that's all in this
Gardening classes tonight.
on the slides and on the outline. Those
Well,
links.
30 minutes late.
Okay, so soil and fertilizing for peppers, just like tomatoes. Don't want to spend time on that. This right here looks like an apple, but it's actually a enlarged picture of a pimento pepper, which are also known as cherry peppers. And this right here is a hot pepper. I'm not sure which one. I didn't have the name of it written down. Watering, we talked about that already, evenly, and avoid super wet soil, but keep your watering even and mulch. Keep it mulched. Okay, so one thing people don't know about peppers is that they like a little bit of support. So those wimpy cages that people tend to put on their tomatoes, I like to use those on my peppers. Peppers don't get nearly as big as tomatoes. It seems to me like tomato cages should be called pepper cages. So that's an option if you have those at home. You can put those around your pepper plants. If you have a few rows of peppers, now I don't expect people to be growing this many peppers in their backyard unless they're absolutely obsessed. This is a small farm, but I put this picture in here because of the weave. You can do this kind of weaving method like I mentioned for the tomatoes, but you don't need a sturdy post and you don't need a post at every plant. This is, you can kind of see how they weave the string on either side. It's nice because you can get the fruit to be supported that way and it's easy to see when it's ready. And again, there's a video about this whole method right here if you want to take a look at it later. So a little word about, I mentioned with tomatoes, you can grow a fall crop starting at the end of June. People don't tend to talk about growing peppers as a fall crop in Oklahoma. Mainly because they kind of hit their stride as the weather cools off. So if you have your peppers in the ground from the beginning of spring through the heat of the summer, they will start to really kick into gear in the fall, and you may not need to plant a new crop of them. Although you certainly can, because we have such a long growing season and they are 60 to 90-day crops typically. You have time if you want to put in a new round of them in the fall, say late June through July. Okay, so harvesting on peppers, you know, I've done this so many times. I went to pull off a pepper and I've like ripped off the entire stem. Keep your clippers handy when you're harvesting your peppers because you'll be thankful. You can pick your peppers whenever you want. You don't have to wait till they're a certain size. It's preference. Preference when you pick your peppers. Just had to say that. Say it 3 times. Go ahead. But one thing people don't realize is that a green pepper will eventually turn orange or red or brown. They all turn colors. So like the green peppers you see in the store are totally unripe, and the red ones are the ones that have had time to ripe. So I personally prefer it when they turn red because they tend to be a little bit sweeter, have more flavor. Okay, so looking at the clock here, we're going to talk about melons and squash, and I'm not going to go into as much detail here, but I've grouped them, and there's the same level of detail that I just covered for peppers and tomatoes are in your outline on melons and on squash. But there's a few things I thought would be really interesting for people with regard to both crops, so I'll highlight those. So people don't realize that in the realm of melons, so melons are all in the family of cucumbers, the cucurbit family, the Cucurbitaceae family. Now, what we tend to eat are muskmelons that are also known as cantaloupe. True cantaloupe are totally different. It's kind of like, you know, recently in recent years, you've started to see like really funky looking pumpkins at the big box stores in the fall and at the farmer's market. People are starting to realize, oh, the world of pumpkins and winter squash is huge, and it's diverse, and it's so interesting. There's all kinds of different colors, flavors, sizes, and textures to explore. Well, the same is true for melons. We just know about 1% of what's out there. So as a gardener, I encourage you to go online and look at your seed companies and get into the pictures and the descriptions of these different melons and pick stuff out that actually sounds good to you. True cantaloupe is actually a more heat-loving melon, and they can grow well in our environment. So I recommend checking them out, and I'll show you some of the varieties. Of course, so you have true cantaloupe. You have the muskmelons, which are the actual what we call cantaloupes. And then you have the honeydews, which have some subgroups to explore in there called Crenshaw and cassava, and then you have watermelon, all in the same family. One thing, when you grow melons, the male flowers appear first, and so you'll see a lot of flowers come on that don't produce fruit. So don't worry, it's just, biology at work. The female flowers will then come, the pollination will happen when the bees arrive, and you will get your fruit. So melons are monoecious, so they have male and female on separate flowers on the same plant. It's a little botany for you. Okay, so here's a picture of the true cantaloupe. So it's not anything that we're used to. They're like warty, and they're kind of smooth, and they have all these funky colors and shapes. So it's really interesting. So here's some of the true cantaloupe. The word in the farming world is cultivars. It's kind of a word to describe these groups of varieties. So many of you may have never seen these, but some of these have like way more flavor than what we're used to with our muskmelons, aka cantaloupes. So I encourage you to check them out, and knowing that they like the heat and they can do well in our environment. This is a variety that was actually sold by a local seed company that was breeding true cantaloupe cultivars for Oklahoma, but they've since gone out of business, and I don't know whether or not we can still get this Bell Star, but that kind of stuff is exciting. You can come across it. So this is the muskmelon, aka cantaloupe. This is what we're used to. This is your Hale's Best. This is the cantaloupe that we see in the grocery store. And they're fine. They grow well in Oklahoma. They don't tend to succumb to a lot of the pests that the other like melon and pumpkins and winter squash succumb to. They are easier to grow. So this is what they are, and these are some good varieties to try. And so here's some of those varieties that are recommended for Oklahoma. Honeydews we know what honeydews are. They're, always in that medley on your plate at the restaurant when you go out for brunch. And they're always ice cold and unripe when they come to your plate. So if you have a garden or a container at home and you can grow your own, I recommend it so you can taste what they're supposed to taste like with sugar inside. Some of the fun honeydew cultivars to check out and to order seeds online are some of these that are mentioned. So within the world of honeydew, you also have these other cultivars like mentioned. This one here, this is a honeydew Crenshaw, and it takes 110 days, but it's very heat tolerant, and it's a good one for Oklahoma. You wouldn't find these seeds probably even at like a nursery like TLC. You'd have to go online and order them. But the nice thing is that you don't want to really start melons from seedlings. You want to start them directly from seed in the garden. The seeds are big and they're easy to watch and to start if you're a beginner. This is a funky one that I've grown before, Bidwell cassava. So diseases, we do tend to get fungal and bacterial diseases because of all the foliage and the water getting trapped. So you end up with some downy mildew, or powdery mildew is a common one that happens when you have overhead watering. Use drip with your melons if possible. Use resistant varieties. Practice rotation, and then you'll keep those problems down to adult form. So harvesting melons. Oh, I'm really running out of time. I'm going to skip this part. It's really interesting. It's how do you know when to pick these things? There's actually some telltale signs that are listed in your outline for how to tell. So certain ones are easier than others, but you can go through those. Pests on melon squash bugs are a horrible one. Get the eggs when they're little. Spray the nymphs when they're little with the neem oil. This is an old timers tried and true recipe that I came across that works on the adults. But hopefully you don't have to get to that stage because you worked out and you picked the eggs off when you saw them and got the little guys before the adults got big. But I put on the outline hand picking the eggs and then hand picking the adults, but hand picking the adults off is not fun. It's really just gross because they spray like a smell at you when they're related to stink bugs. And I don't know if you ever noticed that they spray like this smell at you when you go near them. This is one thing you can do. You can cover your squash plants before they flower, and that will eliminate a lot of problems beginning of the season. Aphids, just wash them off with water, those little green sucking insects. Cucumber beetles, you can eliminate those with the covers. You can use neem oil on those. I'm gonna go quickly through the rest of this stuff. Watermelon varieties, recommended watermelon varieties. I wanna get to a few things I wanna point out about the squash. And we're gonna have a whole class on pests, so we'll make sure to cover those melon pests. Okay, so squash, this is a really nice picture of what variety you can play with. These are the patty pans. People don't necessarily recognize those. You don't see them in the grocery store very much, but there's lots of different types of summer squash. Summer squash is very fast growing, so you can grow it. Now you can succession plant, so you can wait 3 weeks and plant another plant and then plant another plant, so you just have it coming on, a new fresh plant coming on, and that is one way to get around the pests in a backyard garden. I'm going to skip over a lot of these details. You want to look out for this bug right here, the squash vine borer. They lay a little egg on the stem, and then the caterpillar burrows into the stem, and we can tell you all about those. We watch for them at our gardens. You have to wipe off the eggs just like you do with the squash bugs. Some tips there. There's another shot of the squash bug eggs, the nymphs, and the adults. You get to know what they look like. You want to attack them when they're in the egg and the nymph stage. Okay, so winter squash, you see a couple there. That's a butternut squash, one that is a tried and true winter squash for Oklahoma. But also acorn squash and spaghetti squash grow really well here. So I encourage you guys to try those. You grow them, you start growing them, in the spring up to about now is a good, window for planting, and then you harvest them in the fall. So your preferences on soil and fertility are similar to the melons. I didn't mention this, but melons do like a little bit more sandy soil, but they're not that picky. And I recommend putting in compost into your soil so that improves the drainage. So if you don't have a sandy soil, if you add compost, you will have better drainage. Excuse me. So some of the same characters you're going to see on those other melons, you're going to see on your pumpkins and your squash. Some nice up close pictures. I didn't realize I had so many pictures of squash bugs, but we'll go over how to take care of those in the pest class. So let me open it up to questions on all this. I'm sure we've got a few.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Kat? Good stuff, Kat. I know as a novice myself, it's incredibly intimidating. So you make it all much more palatable, knowing how to do and what to do in certain scenarios. Well, if we don't have any questions coming in, Kat, my intention is to get this information, your slides together, as well as the upcoming trainings. And I plan on putting that all in one email and sending it out to those who are with us and those who couldn't make it with us. Yeah, on July 2nd, the composting one. I'm excited about that. I listen to some radio sometimes, and I hear the term composting thrown out, and it seems like something that is quite intimidating. So I'm excited to hear this. I'm excited to hear how I may be able to undertake it. So yeah, if we don't have any questions, Kat, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I feel badly. I really went so quickly over squash and um, the summer squash and the pumpkins and the winter squash. Does anybody have any questions about that in particular?
Good stuff. Well, Kat, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you so much for being with us. Please continue to come back. I enjoy these so much. I think they're a nice little break with all the craziness going on. And so thank you so much again. And I look forward to the next one on July 2nd.
You're so welcome. Thanks everybody who came. Appreciate it.
You guys have a good evening.